Welcome everyone to Headache-Free Payroll Compliance webinar. I am Carlos Garcia, Product Manager for Payroll Applications here at AccountantsWorld, and your host for this webinar. This webinar broadcasts audio over the PC speakers, or you may use our teleconference number, which was available when you first signed in. Please note that my colleague, Raja Batista, will be addressing your questions during the webinar, so please feel free to submit them. And at the end of the webinar, we will also have a Q&A session to answer any remaining questions. Okay, so we have a lot of material to cover, so we're going to start right away, and I'm going to try to keep it within an hour. I would like to cover compliance setup, talk about payments, forms, adding a new state, EServices. We'll talk about setup and guidelines, process and controls, mention a little bit about non-sufficient funds, and we'll look at compliance processes and controls, like monitoring your tax payments or special payment options or tax forms filing. We'll also be discussing managing your payroll compliance, which is the main part of this webinar, and communication and backups related to compliance, and I will also highlight some training and resource materials. Compliance setup. Okay, we'll touch upon payments and the importance of the tax deposit frequency and account numbers. Forms, same thing, account numbers, very important always. AutoEfile, and we'll talk about manual versus e-file. And again, the new items to consider, or the items to consider when you're adding a new state. So let's get started. This is the employer tax information screen. Okay. Tax payments are scheduled based on the employer's tax deposit frequencies issued by the taxing authorities. It is imperative that this is set up correctly from the very beginning and evaluated every year at year end. Okay. We have seen many cases where employers have been penalized for not using the proper tax deposit frequency. Another critical area is using the proper account numbers. Okay. And a note on the unemployment rate, because it is very common during the first quarter, if the unemployment rate changes during the quarter, the form will recalculate the entire quarter's liability based on the tax wages times the rate at the time that we do the form, which is now, which by now you should have the new unemployment rate in the system. The state account numbers entered in the employer tax information screen will flow only the first time to the EServices taxes screen for that particular state. Okay. The reason being that many states will use the same withholding and unemployment account numbers for electronic purposes. Okay. However, there are states that have their own unique e-file and EFT ID numbers. You may change this information in the EServices taxes screen if it is different than that from the employer setup. Again, very important not to use bogus numbers. Okay. This will only generate headaches and possibly late or failure to file pay notices. These ID numbers are critical for the proper posting of your client's compliance payments and forms. This is the compliance preferences screen, and you use it to review and set up any of the employer preferences. There's 3 items here that I would like to point out. The first one is the system defaults to applying overpayments for the first 3 quarters of the year. However, if you want to force a refund, then you need to check the box here in the compliance preferences. The second is if you want to print tax agency checks through the system, checking this box will allow you to print the check through the Payroll Relief for manual payment screen. And the third one, perhaps the employer wishes to pay their federal unemployment quarterly, even though it's under $500 threshold. If you check that box, the system will schedule quarterly future payments. Compliance and e-services. Okay. AutoEfile, which is coming up next week. AutoEfile is the process whereby eligible forms are electronically filed automatically starting around the 15th, 16th, 17th of the compliance month, depending on the month, or in other words, after that last monthly payment is processed. Okay. A note on AutoEfile. In the beginning of the month, you will receive a AutoEfile reminder email to prompt you to review your client's records. Okay. Immediately after the third monthly payment is processed, the AutoEfile function will run daily until all forms have been e-filed, which is usually by the 25th, since in most cases this is the last day for processing any ACH credit payments due with the form. Okay. It is imperative that you advise your clients that any balance due on forms can be debited anytime after the 15th of the month. Okay. You will be notified by email of any rejections to enable you to correct any issues promptly and manually re-file the form. We strongly recommend that you use on a daily basis the available tools in the program to manage compliance. And I will cover these in our Managing Your Payroll Compliance section a bit later in the webinar. Another preference is pre-funding. Employers that wish to be debited for payroll taxes on the pay date may opt to use pre-funding. When you select this option, it means that AccountantsWorld is authorized to debit payroll taxes on the pay date for any payroll, regardless of the due date for the tax. The debited taxes can only be credited to the appropriate taxing authority, and no refunds can be made to the employer. You further agree that all necessary funds will be available in the employer's account the day before the pay date. This is the day that the ACH transaction is initiated. Okay. Only tax payments that can be made via electronic fund transfers will be pre-funded. The Use EFT checkbox must be enabled for that particular state. All pending liabilities with the same due date will be pre-funded. So, for example, okay, let's take an example of a monthly tax depositor. Okay, they run a payroll with a pay date of February 9th. At that time, pre-funding is not enabled. Therefore, the liability is due for monthly depositors on March 15th. You now enable pre-funding, and you run the next payroll with a pay date of February 23rd. Those liabilities are also due on March 15th. Therefore, the system will debit the customer's account for both payroll liabilities on February 23rd. Okay, because it groups them by due date, and they will pre-fund the full amount. So important to keep that in mind. Some things to consider when you're adding a new state. You want to make sure that you have the correct state tax deposit frequency. The state tax account numbers for both withholding and unemployment. Always in payroll, we're dealing with two agencies. The state unemployment rate and the effective date, and any other employer taxes. Okay, for example, some states have a supplemental UI tax or an SDI tax. Employer has to register as a new employer in that state if they're going to be withholding taxes for that state. And registration forms are available from the EServices tax screen or under the resources employer forms. Okay, so let's jump right into EServices. We'll talk about setup, the application, the Form 8655, some process and controls guidelines, and ensuring that tests run efficiently, and again, non-sufficient funds. The ACH application and the Form 8655 are required documents for any electronic services in Payroll Relief. These documents are covered in detail in our implementation webinars. What I would like to focus on today is the actual process and the guidelines in using EServices as they relate to compliance. AccountantsWorld operates solely as a third-party transmitter of electronic tax returns. Okay. It does not meet the definition of a reporting agent authorized to prepare and sign employment tax returns electronically. Therefore, You, as the client's accounting firm or payroll processing provider, are the reporting agent. Most of you already have an EFIN, in which case you simply just need to apply for the RA role, reporting agent role. If you do not have an EFIN, then you will need to request one and then submit your first 8655 to trigger the RA role request. The IRS website does have a lot of information under their IRS electronic filing and EServices page. What we're looking at here now is the upload 8655 screen, which allows you to view, print, and or email the 8655 to the client, then upload it and submit it to the IRS. On the left side of the screen, you will notice a step-by-step instruction of the process. This screen here is the ACH application screen. For your convenience, there are two links at the top right of the screen that explain in detail the EServices process. Reading these documents is a must for any staff member working with Payroll Relief, so please take the time to read them. It is important that you, your staff, and your client, if applicable, understand how EServices process works. The North American Industry Classification System, also known as NAICS, is the standard used by the federal statistical agencies in classifying business establishments. Most recently, due to national security concerns, banks are a lot more scrupulous and now also use the NAICS codes to classify businesses. So when you're on this screen, you have noticed that this field now is a required field, okay? And it's not intended, as it was in the past, to just put any 6 digits. You need to select or search a code from the dropdown. And there is also a link to the NAICS website. Okay. Also, it is important that you pay attention to the screen text and instructions throughout the program. Here, for example, we have included suggested guidelines for risk management. You can barely see it. It's in the bottom left part of the screen. I didn't want to take up too much space, but basically it's risk management guidelines on screen in addition to those in the document that I started pointing out before. And just keep in mind that in today's world, we all need to exercise more diligence with regard to whom we conduct business with. Okay, so be careful about internet clients. You know, you need to really know the client before you engage in electronic services. Okay, so let's go over the process. In Payroll Relief, it's pretty simple. Okay. The ACH application in Form 8655, either one, complete all applicable fields on the ACH application screen. This information will automatically populate the application, access each document from the respective screen, print or email it to the client, and have the client sign and date it. Either you or the client need to scan the signed documents and use the upload feature. The ACH application gets uploaded to AccountantsWorld. The Form 8655 gets uploaded to your archive data or cloud cabinet firm folder called Forms 8655 for your records, and also must be faxed to the IRS. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. Note that the upload button for the ACH application will be disabled until you have completed the bank validation process. That's Payroll Relief's process. Now, your process should include a thorough review of the documents prior to upload to ensure completion and proper authorized signatures. Okay? We do not want the bookkeeper signing the ACH application. It has to be an officer or a principal of the business. You need to safeguard the documents. Keep in mind that the application contains the principal's Social Security number, and you need to have proper follow-up. Review emails received from our EServices department regarding ACH application. The IRS will now contact you directly with any issues related to Form 8655, and you need to review the EServices snapshot in the program for updates. If all is done correctly, the whole process should not take more than 4 to 5 banking days. Once accepted, keep in mind that you have the ability to enable or disable any service the client wants or does not want to use. So before we move on, I would like to point out recent changes related to the reporting agent role. Under the firm compliance options, or on the firm option, sorry, we have redesigned the screen and have added a tab for reporting agent information. Here you will enter all necessary information to successfully e-file federal forms with your firm as the reporting agent. All fields are required. The IRS will use the fax number, and it's very important because the IRS, again, will use this fax number entered here to communicate with you on all 8655 related matters. The EFIN and the RA numbers are your PINs for the firm or for the payroll service. So it's used for all your clients. So if there's an issue where you can e-file forms for one client and not another client, it really doesn't have to do with the EFIN or the RA PIN because you were able to e-file for some clients. So it has to be something else that has to be looked into as to why that cannot be e-filed. And we'll look at some of the tools available in Payroll Relief that will provide some guidelines or some guidance for you to resolve that problem. Okay, so this is the process. We're looking at the Upload 8655 screen. For new clients, okay, notice that the status is no document on record. Okay, you need to click on View. Okay, to view Form 8655, and here you have the option to either email it to the client, or if you hand gave it to them, you can mark it as sent to client. Okay, and the reason these two buttons are here is because it needs to update the status, as we will see that in the next slide. Okay, now the status is sent to client, and the reporting agent is the firm. Once you get Form 8655 back from your client with proper signatures and you have scanned the document, you are now ready to upload. So you click on the Upload. And notice that in this dialog box, there's an option to indicate that you are already the reporting agent. So we have had many cases where the firm has already have a reporting agent role. They just add the employment tax to it. So it's simply you would check that box, and it will make the status of the 8655 directly to processed, which is the final step. Otherwise, select the form and click to upload from the drop-down. So in this case, you will select Federal Form 8655 and click Upload from the bottom of the dialog box. Now the status is uploaded or received. You are ready to review the document for accuracy and proper signatures. Okay. Click the Change Status to either reviewed or incomplete, depending on what the outcome is of your review. Selecting Reviewed will change the status to Reviewed and enable the option to submit form to the IRS. Okay. Notice there's a little counter next to IRS. That's just to let you know how many 8655s are sitting in the queue ready to be faxed to the IRS. So if you do this on a per client, there'll always be one. You can process a number of clients. It'll let you know what the number is, and that's how many 8655s will be processed and sent to the IRS. Once that is done, the last function, that makes the status processed, which is the final status. Now, a question comes up. How do I manage all this for all my clients? Well, you know Payroll Relief is known to provide many comprehensive management tools. Available on the Payroll Center is the Manage 8655 screen. Okay, and this screen lists all your clients, the employer name, what the status of the 8655 is, what the date of that status was, and the last column will show you the reporting agent, whether it's the firm or if it's one of the clients that were grandfathered in under AccountantsWorld reporting agent. And one more thing, whether you have opted for form balance due payments to be processed by the system or have the taxing agency directly debit your client's account, you do need to enter bank information. Okay. The primary account here at the top is used for all ACH transactions. So it includes direct deposit, child support, billing, and taxes. This account must be validated. Okay. So the way the validation process works is you enter the account number, you click on the submit button. The system will randomly debit the employer's account an amount for between a penny and $1 or 99 cents. You or the employer will log into the bank, obtain that amount, come back to the screen, click on the validate button, enter the amount, and your bank account is now validated if the amount matches. If you are only using ACH transactions strictly for tax payments, or just maybe wish to have a separate account for making your tax payments, then you use the secondary account. This account, however, does not need to be validated. Okay, let's go over some frequently asked questions that come up during our compliance month here. First question is, why is the bank validation required in order to upload the ACH application screen? Well, the reason for this is because we experienced many applications that were uploaded. We started processing them only to later learn that either the bank account was never validated, was incorrect, or closed. This led to wasted resources and inefficiencies on our end. Another reason is security and fraud prevention. If we process and approve a client's EServices before the validation has cleared, typically within 3 banking days, they can then process a direct deposit payroll, use a bogus or fraudulent account. Why are some tax payments paid electronically 3 banking days before the due date when all over your system it is stated that 4 banking days are required? Well, think of it as a courtesy, really. Okay, there is no guarantee that tax payments will be processed via EFT in 3 days. Okay, we do say it's 4 days. But again, let me use an example. We have a semi-weekly depositor who is not using direct deposit. Okay, their pay date is Friday. That means their taxes are due the following Wednesday. If the payroll is approved before the last EFT transmittal of the day, then the payment will be picked up and sent via EFT, okay, even though there's only 3 banking days between Friday and the following Wednesday. On the other hand, if it's approved after the last transmittal, or for whatever reason, something happens in our last transmittal and it doesn't get processed, okay, that's where the no guarantee comes that it will be processed in 3 banking days. I have AutoEfile enabled, yet my tax form was not AutoEfiled. Why? Very, very common question. Well, you need to check the exceptions report, which we'll look at momentarily. Perhaps there's a pending payment, or there's some missing or incorrect information. E-file for that particular form has been disabled, or AutoEfile enabled too late, or it requires another form to be filed before this form is filed. Okay. So there are several reasons why, and the system will alert you and let you know why that happened. I need to unfile electronically filed form. Why can't I do that? Well, we like to use the example. It's just like dropping it in the mailbox. Okay, you can't retrieve the envelope once you put it in that mailbox. Same thing with the electronically filed. It's just it would be, I guess, you know, in the mailbox case, you can talk to the postmaster or whatever, and there's a lot of work involved even to retrieve it from there, and there's a lot more work if we were to try to retrieve it from electronically. These files get batched, defiled, and it's just impossible. So I would just use caution before approving a form for e-file. My client's unemployment rate changed, and they are using pre-funding. What will happen with the excess or the deficit? Well, once the form is filed, the excess will be refunded to the employer. If there's a deficit, it will be debited at the time of filing the form. Why does the pending payment for the unemployment form show a different amount than what is actually due on the form? Okay, and I can relate this back to the example that I gave you in the beginning, that the rate could change during the quarter. Okay, that's one example. Or another one is that you have entered a prior quarter adjustment, which we'll see in a few minutes. Those two reasons could be why the balance due on the form could be different than what's in the pending payment screen. Debit date says 4 banking days before the due date. Why was my client debited earlier? Okay. Again, if it's a coupon payment, perhaps you requested pay early. Or if the form was filed early, it would be debited. If there's a balance due, that balance due will be debited at the time the form is filed. Okay. And the last one, no tax forms were scheduled for a client. Why? Well, if you have no payrolls in the current year, then no form will be scheduled for that client. Our last topic in EServices compliance is NSFs. Okay, so we like to always advise that only take fiscally responsible clients. We cannot say it enough. Or better yet, don't use electronic services for any client that is not fiscally responsible or has continual cash flow problems. Okay? Non-sufficient funds are the number 2 problem that we see in electronic services other than the bogus account numbers. Okay? Especially in taxes. Okay? How to avoid NSFs? We recommend that you talk to your clients and help them understand the importance of planning properly and allocating funds for tax payments. Okay? Defaulting on payroll tax payments is not cost effective. Penalties plus interest can quickly add up. Okay? Plus you have NSF fees, plus the time, labor costs addressing those NSFs. By the way, the IRS will apply any deposit to the most recent liability, leaving older unpaid liabilities accumulating yet more interest and stiffer penalties. Okay? And we all know the IRS collects millions of dollars in late payment penalties and interest every year. A history of NSFs will jeopardize the client's credit and your reputation. Okay. EServices will be disabled, and eventually ACH application will be frozen, and they will no longer be able to use any electronic services. So again, cash flow problems, do not enable EFT, make manual payments. So since we're talking about NSFs, I just wanted to throw this in here. I'm going to ask you to please stay tuned. We have an announcement at the end of the webinar of a new feature that will greatly enhance cash flow management and prevent NSFs. We move on to our next topic, which is compliance, process, and controls. So we're going to be looking at monitoring tax payments, manual versus electronic fund transfers, the special payment options available to you in Payroll Relief, and tax form filing matters. This is the employer dashboard, and it has a pane for taxes due through the end of the quarter. Please take note of the text at the bottom of the tax due pane. It says, if filed early, will be debited on date filed. Okay, just to reiterate what I just said about filing the form and the client being debited. Applies to both tax payments paid early or forms filed early. More on the employer dashboard and some enhancements later. The pending payment screen shows in the last column how payment is scheduled to be processed. Okay, so it's either EFT or record payment only. That's for manual payments. Okay, if you do happen to request a pay early, it will say pay early requested. Okay, so let's take a look at those special payment options available to you in Payroll Relief so that you can manage some of these tax payments. The first one is you may schedule an additional payment to be processed via EFT. Okay, you check the appropriate box, and you will be presented with a grid to enter the details of your payment. The settlement date needs to be 4 banking days into the future. For manual payments, you have the ability to change the amount paid. You may also select to pay electronic payments earlier than their normal due date. That is the pay early function that I was talking about. Okay, you select the payment and either check the box to debit now, which will process the payment that same day and credit the amount 4 banking days later, or check the box to change the settlement date, which will present you with an entry field for a date. Keep in mind the date must be 4 banking days into the future. Lastly, on this half of the screen, if the employer is using pre-funding, there is an option to release pre-funded payments early. Okay, check the box and the system will provide a grid for you to enter the information, very similar to the additional payment requested. The second half of the screen has options to disable EFT for a particular payment. Should you change your mind, you can also undo it. There's a checkbox to undo disable. Okay. What this does is it prevents or it helps you not have to go to the actual EServices settings and turn it on and turn it off and turn it on and turn it off. Okay. This is giving you the option to disable one particular payment for EFT purposes, while all the others will still be processed EFT, whereas the other one, you're actually disabling the entire function. Should you wish to delete an electronically scheduled payment altogether, you may do so using this option on the screen. The last option is to change form payment to a payment coupon payment. Okay. This is available for situations where there is a balance due with a form and you wish to make a payment with a coupon rather than wait and make it with the form. Okay. The best example I can use for this is the federal 940 unemployment form. Okay. Let's say it comes to the end of the year and now the 940 has a balance due over $500. The IRS says you cannot file a 940 with a balance due over $500. Therefore, you would change that to an 8109 coupon, process the payment. That will flow to the deposits line and therefore reduce the balance due on the form to 0. Okay. There are some state forms where this may apply also. Again, just keep in mind, pending payments sometimes come from a form. If you wish to make a payment and there's a coupon to do so, you can change that to a coupon and it just becomes another deposit. So important. Now, checking a box at each of these options is just selecting that you would like to carry out the respective action. When you're done, you need to click the Process Payments button in order for the system to actually perform the tasks. An action strongly discouraged is the continual on, off, on practice for certain e-services. Okay, we see this happen all the time, and it just creates a lot of problems, specifically EFTPS and EFT payments. Okay, this is precisely the reason why most of the special payment options provided in Payroll Relief are meant as a tool for you to manage these odd situations. Obviously, if the client has a continual problem with cash flows, they should not be placed on electronic services. Keep in mind that changing the settlement date may still represent late payment penalties and interest. Okay, but I can't say it enough, shutting it on and off and on again. It just, if you forget to turn it back on, or if you forget to turn it off, then it just creates payments and more NSFs, more headaches. So I would stay away from that practice. Let's go through this flow chart quickly to cover two scenarios of forms filed with a balance due. Okay. First, we'll do the manual process where no electronic services are there. So if you go tax form balance due, paper, okay, then the system says, okay, it's paper filed. Are you using EFT? If you are not using EFT, are you using tax agency checks? If yes, it schedules a pending payment so that you can print the check and the coupon. Back up a little bit. If you are using EFT, even though it's a paper form and the balance can be paid electronically, again, the system will schedule a pending payment so that it gets processed. Okay. If you're not using EFT and you're not using checks, then it just records the payment when you file the paper form. We go back to a form that's electronically filed. So electronically filed, yes. Is there a balance due with the form? Yes or no. If it's no, are you using EFT? No, and it just follows the pattern. If there's a balance due with the form, yes. Is the form e-filed with the payment or not? Okay. It gets a little confusing here at the end. That's why I have the two arrows here. Okay. Balance due with the form. Because a balance due with the form can be either processed ACH debit, which means it gets paid with the form, or ACH credit, which means that a scheduled payment goes into the pending payment screen for payroll relief to debit that amount and credit the tax agency 4 days later. Okay. So just briefly I'm sure most of you know the difference between a debit and a credit, but in this case it's ACH debit, ACH credit. ACH debit, the system sends the bank information entered in the system to the taxing agency, and it is the taxing agency that directly debits the employer's account. Okay, we have no control over the debit date. That is the discretion of the taxing agency. If it's ACH credit, which most of our payments are, then the system will debit the bank account entered in the system. The funds are placed in a fiduciary account until cleared. Then the system sends the credit to the taxing agency with due date as settlement date, if no pay early has been requested. Obviously, if pay early has been requested, the settlement date changes. Compliance form filed with an overpayment. Okay. Here we have a section of Federal Form 941 that shows a $119 overpayment. Remember that the system defaults for the first 3 quarters to apply any overpayment amounts. Okay. But you need to keep in mind also that not until the form is recorded as filed will the system begin to apply that overpayment to any future liabilities. So even though you know you have an overpayment coming on the form, unless that form is marked as filed, the system doesn't know, and it will not use the overpayment to offset any future liabilities. So here, for example, I have recorded my 941 as filed, and therefore, when we look at the details of the semi-weekly federal tax payment, we see that the overpayment column has been applied and has reduced the payment due by $119. Okay. So you can click on the payment type and it will show you the payment details, and there is a column for overpayment. Compliance tax forms. Okay, the system will warn you if some payments have not been recorded for this period. Again, if you try to file a form today and your April 15th, if your monthly hasn't been made, or April 16th hasn't been made, then you're going to get this pop-up that the payment is still pending. And you need to take care of the payment before you file the form. You can select all, or you can select individual forms, and then the action item at the top left. Either print, e-file, or record. Okay. An important change that recently happened with the last update release this past weekend is that now the e-file button will be disabled if the employer does not have an 8655 approved. Okay. Previously, the system was checking it by form. So you would click e-file, and then it would go through the list of the forms that you selected and check for each form. It wasn't efficient. Basically, if you don't have an 8655 approved, the e-file button will now be disabled. We currently support e-file for approximately 45 states. If you select e-file and the form cannot be electronically filed in the system, we'll give you an error, and the form will not be marked as e-filed. Okay. And let me please provide a tip here that we strongly recommend that you treat the 16th of the month, if you're using AutoEfile, or anywhere between the 23rd and the 25th, depending on the month, as the deadline for all forms. Okay? Why wait until the last minute and run the risk of forgetting or missing the cutoff? Okay? Now you're faced with late filing penalty and interest. It's worse if there's a balance due. Okay. And what I mean by missing the cutoff, again, if there's a balance due and it has to be processed ACH credit, that cutoff is going to be, for this particular month, it's going to be April 24th, 4 banking days before the due date of April 30th. Prior period adjustment, which I mentioned before as a difference in between the form and the pending payment. Some state forms have lines for prior period adjustments. Sometimes it is a single line. Others, there are 2 separate lines, either overpaid, underpaid. If it's 2 lines, if it's 1 line, it's positive or negative. What we do in Payroll Relief, here in, for example, the NYS 45, line 6 is underpaid, line 8 is overpaid. So, in the tax form screen, when you click on the form name, okay, so if I click on the NYS 45, Payroll Relief provides an entry field for these adjustments. You either enter a negative amount if underpaid or a positive amount if overpaid. Okay, I have entered a negative $214. Also notice while we're here that there are notes as well as the ability to unfile a manually recorded form. Or in the rare event that an unnecessary form was scheduled, you can delete the form. Go back to the NYS 45. Notice now that the negative 214 is entered on line 8 of the form as a UI previously underpaid and has increased the balance due. Next topic, managing your payroll compliance. Okay, and this is, I think, the highlight of the webinar. So let's dig right in. Managing compliance could be quite cumbersome. This is why Payroll Relief is the only program in the market that provides you with the tools for managing and analyzing your payroll compliance at the firm level, or in other words, the service bureau level. Make certain to have at a high level a documented process to use these tools and as controls in the compliance area. Okay. You are most likely familiar with them. For those of you that are new to Payroll Relief and you're undergoing your first compliance month, this is an important area because this is what you're going to be actively doing within the next couple of days. The majority of these tools are found under the Payroll Center Managed Compliance reports. So let's take a look at the first 3, all associated with e-file. In the beginning of the month, as I said before, you receive an AutoEfile reminder email to strongly, and in that email, we strongly suggest that you review the exception screen to learn which forms will not be AutoEfiled due to an exception. Okay, so these tabs are sequentially laid out for you. The first one that you're going to want to look at is exceptions. This is before AutoEfile runs. You can do it for a particular employer, you can do it for all, and it will tell you if there's any problems with any forms, and those forms will not be AutoEfiled until those problems are resolved. The second screen, after the AutoEfile has run, you can look at the unsuccessful e-file. This screen will show you which forms were not able to be AutoEfiled. You will also receive an email with this information. You need to correct any errors and manually re-file the form. And the third one is basically forms that were not e-filed and they were rejected. Okay, and it does show the rejection reason in the last column. The next two tabs are associated with forms. We have forms due within the next month, and we have all past due forms. Now, for both screens, you may view all of the employers, or you may select a specific employer. The Manage Taxes screen provides for a specific range of pay dates, all the liabilities and payments for federal, state, and if applicable, local taxes for all employers. Okay, so you have the employer name, federal liability, payments, state liabilities, payments, local liability, and payment. And the last of these screens is the federal look-back screen, which should be reviewed at year-end or in January. It provides quarterly liabilities for either all or a specific employer. It also provides the total tax liability and the current tax deposit frequency. Okay, as mentioned earlier, I cannot tell you how many times we hear about employers getting IRS notices with penalties and interest because they were using the incorrect tax deposit frequency. Very important that you review this every year, not only for the IRS federal, but also for the states. Okay. For example, let's take a look at JT Landscaping. Okay. Notice that the client's total tax liability is almost $500,000, and their current frequency is monthly. Okay, that is dead wrong, and it should be semi-weekly. That's a flag right there that it should be changed. Okay, and that they will incur penalties because if they're using the monthly frequency, and their look-back tax is in this case $451,000. Also, please notice that all these screens can be exported to Excel. So this whole manage compliance area is very important, and all the tools are there for you to manage your compliance during this busy month. Okay, we're down the stretch here. An important part of compliance is communication with your clients, having backup of forms and reports. So let's look at that quickly. Client communication is always important, more so during compliance. Payroll Relief features a client notification blast email functionality under the Firm Administration tab. Simply select the clients you wish to notify and click on the email button. From this screen, you can either send one of the preset canned emails or create your own custom email. Let's select quarterly compliance reports from this list right here, which is the next to last. And now you see the body of the email. Simply click Send Email to send all selected employers that email. Another part of client notifications or communication built into the program are the tax due and forms due reminder emails. Make sure that these are selected in the Firm Administration email options. Remember that the state unemployment forms do have confidential Social Security information. Therefore, we strongly recommend that you use the option for secure password protection and enter a password in the employer preferences screen. Okay, and we'll talk about this, or we'll touch upon this when we talk about the batch processes available in Payroll Relief. The last major topic today is the importance of backing up your client's compliance forms and reports. So regardless of whether your firm owns Cloud Cabinet, which is our document management system application, or not, you may archive forms and payroll report sets for each of your clients. Now, the payroll report set gets automatically archived after checks have been printed for each payroll. And Under batch processing, there is an option to archive forms. You have the ability to batch archive all filed compliance forms. Simply select the period, all the clients that you wish to archive, and click on the archive button. Okay. And also notice at the bottom of the screen, it tells you the total number of forms that are going to be archived based on the clients that you selected. Okay. This process will also email a password-protected zip file to the client. And please note that the employer should have a password in the employer preferences. And for your convenience, if you notice the first column here of the grid, PWD, password, if it has a check mark, that means that there's a password for that client, and that client will receive an email. Those who do not will not receive an email. The forms will be archived to the archive data, but the client will not receive an email because there's no password to protect that information. Okay. Under batch processing for W-2s, the program now offers the ability to batch archive all filed W-2s to Cloud Cabinet. Okay, again, simply select the clients you wish to archive and click the archive button. Same holds true for 1099s. And in the tax form screen, you may manually archive tax forms for a specific client. Same with compliance reports. There's an archive button there that you can archive manually any compliance reports that you wish to archive. Another very convenient and useful feature in Payroll Relief is the ability to create your own customized report sets for each client, which you may manually archive. Create a compliance set and select which reports you would like to be included in that set from the list of all the reports. One of my favorites and very important is the ACH transaction screen under the EServices menu. I strongly recommend to all users of electronic fund transfers to archive this information for a complete record of all ACH transactions for a specific period of time, ideally the year, and all transaction types. The screen does offer various filtering options. Also, if you wish to see only credits or only debits or both, you can do that. Notice that there's a trace number column, okay, for every transaction, and that trace number is a link. If we click on that link, okay, it will provide us with a detailed report that you may print out as proof of the transaction. Okay, it has the employer name, the EIN, the ID, the amount, the date and time sent, the settlement date, the bank information, and the outgoing trace number. Okay. And again, notice that that information can be exported to Excel. Last area is area for your payroll service to run smoothly and efficient. You need to have resources to train your staff. Payroll Relief offers many of these. Like, for example, at any screen in the program, you may simply click on the question mark in the upper right-hand corner to access help text for a particular screen. Payroll Relief has a comprehensive set of resources to help you with your payroll service. Here, we are looking at the Forms and Publications screen, which provides links to current payroll-related forms and publications. Okay, there are many other resources available under the Resources menu. There are links to various payroll-related associations, IRS payroll topics, the Department of Labor, and so forth. Employment forms. There's a full library of employment forms for federal and state. We have new hire forms, we have employer forms, we have employee forms. And in most cases, it includes a link to the actual form, an online form, or both. So notice in California new hire, we provide both the form and the online registration or reporting. Payroll Relief announcements. Make sure to always check the program announcements for any additions or enhancements. with regard to compliance, we announce any new forms, any new e-file, and any electronic fund transfers added, as well as remind you of important tasks or upcoming events like AutoEfile. Okay. Actually, speaking of new e-file states, we finally are working and near completion to support unemployment e-filing for Georgia, the state of Georgia, which is a very big state for us. So good news for all those Georgia employers that have been looking forward to e-filing their unemployment form. And speaking of announcements and enhancements, I think it's time now to illustrate our latest feature. Okay. Earlier, I spoke about EServices, tax payments, and NSFs. Well, we understand how important it is for your clients to manage their cash flow and funds requirement. So our big announcement, which many of you probably already noticed, there is now a new pane in the employer dashboard for funds required. Okay. Let's take a closer look at this pane. The pane will dynamically provide information for direct deposit, child support, and tax funds required within the next 3 weeks or 21 days, with a convenient total by day. What I mean by dynamically is that every time you access the screen, it refreshes the information. So provided you ran a payroll or to generate direct deposits, child support, or taxes, it will refresh that information. You may want to take note of the first and the third amount in the total column for taxes for the next slide that we're going to look at. So 13,000 and 1,682. Okay. So the system is making a best effort to gather this information accurately. So allow me to make a best effort to explain how it works. Direct deposits and child support payments are pretty straightforward. Okay, after processing a payroll, the ACH transactions immediately are existent and scheduled with a debit or credit date. Taxes, however, are a bit more complex. I'm hoping that you can see the numbers here. Okay, I have taken the funds required pane and placed it on the pending payment screen. Notice there are 3 payments pending for April 18th with a debit date of April 12th, 4 banking days before. Okay. Also notice that in the funds required pane, the total cash requirement for 4/12 is 1,682, which is the total of these 3 payments. Lastly, take note of the 4 payments due on April 13th. Now for these, it's too late for them to be processed electronically. So even with a 3 banking days lead, which would have been yesterday, April 10th. But the point here is that the funds required pane, as a reminder, will also show you any amounts for which the debit date has passed. Okay. Obviously, this is new, where we welcome any feedback from you regarding this, and we will together progressively make it better. We have been asked from early observers the question, hey, what happened to the tax forms due pane? Well, as illustrated earlier, there is the forms due screen under the Payroll Center Managed Compliance, which is actually better in that you may view for a single client or for all your clients. And the list can also be exported to Excel. So there's no big loss there, in our opinion, because you do have the forms due under the managed compliance. So let's summarize. We looked at setup, payments, forms, adding a new state. We went over EServices, also set up processes and controls. We talked about non-sufficient funds and funds availability. We talked about the process of tax payments and how the special payment options help us to manage any conflicts or any odd situations. We looked at tax forms filing. We looked at the e-file, managing your e-file, your due and past due forms, your tax liabilities and payments. We looked at communication and backups. The batch email feature is one that has really been embraced by a lot of you using the program. It's an excellent means of communication, especially because you have canned emails as well as you can create your own. We looked at the archiving of compliance forms as well as reports, and we also discussed the program help, publications, and a lot of resources available to you within the program. So today's webinar and topics were carefully chosen to enlighten and assist you with headache-free compliance. I am optimistic that this will be the case going forward, and especially this compliance month. I want to remind you that registration for Payroll Relief training webinars is posted on my portal page. And I want to thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to attend this webinar, and we hope it was worth it. Okay, good luck with the remainder of tax season and with compliance month.
Hi, Carl. Hi, Carlos. Great webinar. There is a few questions. I'm sure some more will pop up. Let me see, because I've addressed them. I'm looking for one from Charisse. Let's see if I can find her again. And it's Nathaniel. We're going to try to get to you also. Yeah, Charisse had a situation where it did an NSF. There was a tax liability that was due in February. She said that she used special payment options, made special payment options, triggered it, but the payment never occurred. What should she do?
I think she should call support. That's really a support issue that we would need to look at in here.
Okay, got yeah. That's what I had told her. It might be a little deeper, and we need to look at the employer a little bit more. But she probably did everything right. I thought it might have, if it NSF, that might have been the reason, but that wasn't it. The calls there. Michael asked about Nathaniel asked about making EFT. The acronym is JT-MA. It sounds like MA for Massachusetts EFT. You know what that might mean? I asked him to elaborate if he could.
Hold on, I'm looking at it. You mean
EMAC?
EMAC. EMAC. No, I know it.
EFT. Oh, okay.
That's the medical. Yeah, there was an announcement put in the announcements of how Payroll Relief is going to handle that.
It's going to handle that.
Yeah, there is no form for it. It's just the liabilities. The state will let us know how much it is, and we will debit it just along with the unemployment amount, and we will post it in the pending payment screen. I mean, we're still waiting for the state to give us more guidance. I think they haven't really. Last time I checked with my Director of Electronic Services, there was nothing regarding the specifications of the file that we get from the state. But we have been told in literature that there will be now an added column there for us to read for that medical insurance. Not all employers are subject to it, so and there's no way for us to tell who is and who isn't. So we're basically just going to handle it the same way we handle the unemployment, which is the state tells us what the amount is, and then that's the amount that gets debited from the employer's account.
Okay. Now, Nat had a question about the tax forms when you're using the batch processing. I don't know if you see that one. When each client's tax form screen, Nathaniel. When each client's tax form screen, I can't email forms from there. I have to be in batch processing. Can only email in batch processing once.
There is no feature to email forms from a particular employer's screen. That's part of the batch archival. Okay. For payroll relief users that have been with us for a while, what used to happen is we used to run that process. We used to run it the first weekend after the compliance month was over. And the process that we ran was for all the firms, all the employers. It was an enormous amount of drainage on the system because as we have grown exponentially over the years, it's just more and more. So what we did was we added the ability we moved that function to the firm, and the firm can now batch archive all their employers. So this way, the batch archiving will be occurring at different times, depending on when the firm invokes it, as opposed to us doing it for everybody at the same time. But it's the same process, and the process is it gets archived to Cloud Cabinet or to the archive data solution. And if the employer has a password in the employer preferences, then an email will be sent out. It's a zip file that's opened with the password. And again, it requires a password. But the process is the same that it used to be. The only thing is now that each firm is conducting it at their own leisure, as opposed to us doing it the first weekend of the month following the compliance month. So I hope that explains it the way it works.
There was also a question in there posed earlier that if they make a payment, there's pre-funding, and then they later find out after uh, after it maybe the employer's rate gets lowered, the SUTA rate that is, and what happens is that now the payment is less, but we had pre-funded more money based on the old tax rate. What
I covered that.
happens with that
I
extra
covered
money?
that. I covered that in the webinar. I said that if it's an excess, we return the money to the employer. If it's a deficit, we debit the employer at the time that the form is filed.
Okay, cool.
I see you answered a lot of questions here, Roger, so there's really not that many unanswered questions.
No. There was a question, Renee. You do not need to turn in a new 8655 if we are the reporting agent, unless you really, really, really want to be the reporting agent. It saves you that time and extra work, so you don't have to submit it again.
Well, we do recommend that you do. We would like to see all the clients switched over to the firms.
Yeah, yeah. Debbie would like to be able to customize the canned emails. I think that would be a problem. I think that just based on the logistics of how that is set up, I think you probably maybe you could. I don't know. I think you could do a copy paste and bring them over.
Once you customize a canned email, it's no longer a canned email. So it would be,
right.
Like you said,
Yeah.
you can copy and paste into a custom and then modify it there.
The custom one that we have, yeah. That's why we gave you the custom, the ability to create your custom. But I haven't tested it, but I bet you can copy paste and put it in there. It'll take you like a second, and then just tweak it to your liking if you don't like the one we have. Patty, you have a question on reporting agent. It's kind of involved. It's not a 1, 2, 3 thing. What I'll do is I should have your email address because you had to register, and I'll send you links and that you can go right on the IRS site. I've been able to find them and track them down, and that would be the best way. You may have to contact IRS directly sometimes because they got information about you and your profile that we don't, and they're going to be able to advise you the best to get you, registered in there and get your PIN and your EFIN number and all that for a reporting agent. Makes it easier though if you're already a reporting agent, for tax work.
Oh, an EFIN. And people that are doing tax returns electronically already have an EFIN, so it makes it a lot easier to get a reporting agent role for employment taxes.
Yeah, basically when you upload an 8655, IRS pretty much almost grandfathers you in. That's an easy one. But if you have to be a reporting agent, you need about 45 days for that, and I can send you the links on that to get that, to get you all the best answers from IRS, because every situation seems to be different.
I'm looking at the questions here, and I think getting back to Nathaniel's question about the I think what Nathaniel's looking is for a suggested enhancement that we add an email button at the tax form screen at the employer level, so that you can just do it for one employer. We will definitely consider that, Nathaniel.
Although, Carlos, doesn't aren't all those forms that are filed zipped sent to the employer?
Yes.
The month after? Okay, so.
Yes, but he's saying that he has clients that call him up and ask him to re-email it.
Okay.
Which you can also go into the batch and just select that one client and then.
And do it again? Yeah. No, I don't think there's any, Michelle, I don't think there's any specific issues on processing payrolls for household employees. The one thing that you should know is that we do require that employer to have a business checking account. That's a requirement. They cannot have a personal account, personal checking account, if they're going to be using EFTPS, tax payment, et cetera, et cetera.
And we don't support EFTPS or the 1040 ES vouchers.
Basically, it's just doing direct deposit, right? For the payment. That's the only money that flows. Do you see Renee's question there, Carlos? What they should be doing with the, sounds like quarter one underpayments for UI?
If it's less than a penny,
covered that, yeah.
If it's less than a penny, then it doesn't. Most states say that there's no need to pay a penny. Some users will definitely want to show a zero balance due. You can always enter an additional payment for a penny, and then that will increase the deposits line and reduce the balance due from a penny to zero.
Tristan, the NSF fee, those miscellaneous fees that you might get charged if something goes wrong, or the bank has to perform some kind of manual extrapolation to get information for you. Those are all listed at the very, very last page of the EServices or the ACH application. You'll see them all there, and they're outlined with what the NSF fees are and what they're for, what triggers them. Basically, the tax ones, I believe, are $55, right, Carlos? And the NSF fees for direct deposit is $125. There's a couple of other little miscellaneous fees, and if the employee's bank account was wrong and the money couldn't be deposited, things like that. They're all listed there.
Jagan has a question. Can you please tell how the overpayment recorded impact on filing? Not sure if I understand the full extent of that. I did cover the fact that if you have an overpayment, then you need to file the form before the system starts using that overpayment to offset future liabilities. I don't know if that answers the question, but the impact on filing is really that you have to file the form before the system starts using the overpayment. The email clients shows under firm administration. It's not under batch processing. If you're looking for client notifications, the blast email that we talked about, that's on the firm administration.
Tony, I'm confused by your question. Accounting Power is the current name of our accounting program, right? Accounting Relief was its previous name. So I'm not sure what you mean by linking manual payments from Accounting Power to Accounting Relief. Because it's really, it was really the same program. We added more features to Accounting Power, and we ultimately changed the name a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago or so.
I have a couple of questions here. Why are password emails using a zip file? Not all clients have zip capability. WinZip is a free software, and it's very popular. If we don't zip the file and you have 38 forms, we cannot password protect 38 PDF files. This is the reason why we zip them, and we send a zip file password protected. Another question is, if we check off forced refund on overpayment, will a check be mailed to the client? Yes, if you have the forms, most forms have, when you have an overpayment, it has a checkbox. It says apply to next quarter or refund. And then in the case of the refund, the state will, or the taxing agency will provide a refund to the client. I see other people asking for your IRS e-file link, Roger.
Mm-hmm.
Linda Swick asked for it. So we're probably, at this point, we'd like to add, I think we have a canned email in the support.
Do we
so
really?
if you call
Okay.
our support people, I think so. I'm not sure. I have to double check.
Yeah, I did some looking up for, I got like 2 or 3 links I found.
Well, we had a whole bunch of emails go out last June.
Yeah. You know what happened, Carlos? I think IRS they completely revamped their what they call also their EService to get this to get people registered as reporting agents. So they were down. November. I know October, November to December, I think, and they may have changed things around. Their links may have changed.
Violet has a question. Is there a webinar for setting up multiple child support orders? Unfortunately, no, but please feel free to call our support department, and they can help you set up the multiple child support orders. We do support that. There's an order field there where you can indicate in which order you want the child support orders to be processed. Also, as far as 8655s, you have to be very careful. I don't believe they're valid if they were from many years ago or a couple of years ago. I don't know exactly what the IRS uses, but I know we've had a problem in the past.
Yeah, I believe there's a 60-day window. They look at that date, and we're pretty tight on that. If we see you send a form in that doesn't have the, it's not within the range that IRS would accept, we'll reject it before you even try sending it, because when we upload it and they get it, they're going to reject it anyway. So we're just going to save you the time. It has to be a current form because things could have changed during that period of time. Patty, it's you're not. I get the impression that you're already a reporting agent to file taxes. So no, that's not going to change. It's just basically that I believe that PIN number that IRS has to issue you. There'll be one for payroll. So when you upload an 8655, they'll get back to you and send you the PIN number, via their normal communications, via email like they normally do. Not email, the regular standard USPS mail. And then you'll have that. It's just a different like a different number, I guess, that they use when they add you in there. That's what I've heard in talking to a lot of our users that have gone through that process. Yeah, Michael, I'll send you the links. If you're not oh, I see. So you're going through the whole process for the reporting agent. I see. Okay. Carl, did you want to answer Matthew's question, or he left though? So I don't know. For edification purposes.
Print tax agency checks. What happens when we check off print tax agency checks? The system will schedule a pending payment so that you can print the check through Payroll Relief. Why was it selected on the sample screen during the webinar? I don't know. I guess I wanted to cover the fact that Payroll Relief offers you the ability to print tax agency checks through the system.
Yeah, because when you select it, other things show. I mean, people sometimes don't understand that. When you select a certain field in Payroll Relief, a whole bunch of other stuff appears. If you don't select it, it doesn't appear. So it makes it easier for the presentation and the presenter to be able to explain what he's talking about. If you can see everything on the screen, even though it might not be relevant to what you're doing.
Violet, yes, this webinar is recorded and it will be available when, Roger? Tomorrow?
Probably tomorrow, yeah. I'm going to try and see if I can get it out tonight. It'll be in Payroll Relief Resources webinar.
Yeah, I want to clarify that Robert Walters brought up a good question. I do want to clarify it because Roger, I know you were trying to be helpful, but I think it was a little misleading. The 8655 does not get uploaded to us. Okay, the 8655 gets faxed to the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is, as a courtesy, is we do upload it to the archive data in a folder called Forms 8655 for your convenience, so that you can have it, as a backup. Okay, but it's the sent to IRS button that I showed in the webinar that actually does the faxing. Yes, the faxing is through us, but we're not reviewing anything. It's just going from that button. It's just going through our faxing process and faxing them to the IRS. We're not reviewing them at that point. As far as increasing the direct deposit limit for a client, you need to contact our EService, our electronic services department, or our support team will send you a template that you can send in for a request of increasing the direct deposit. All right, I'm going to have to sign off because I have a meeting to go to. Roger, I don't know if you want to stay for a little bit longer, but I want to again thank you for your time. And if there's any unanswered questions, even at the end of this session, you feel free to contact our support team, and we'll be happy to address those questions. Thank you.